Olá, seja bem-vindo a mais um episódio do podcast Preciso Saber, o podcast da Academia Judaica. Eu sou Karina Calandrin, professora da Academia, e esse é mais um episódio em que faremos perguntas, porque no judaísmo, mais importante do que respostas é sabermos fazer as perguntas certas. Nossa convidada hoje é Laura Shaw Frank, que é hoje vice-presidente do Center for Education Advocacy na American Jewish Committee, onde atua diretamente com temas como identidade, pluralismo, pertencimento e os desafios de ser judeu no século XXI. Seu trabalho dialoga com a complexidade do nosso tempo e com a urgência de construir pontes dentro e fora da comunidade. Vamos conversar? Laura, your work lives at the intersection of identity, belonging, and Jewish continuity. But before we get into it, I would like to ask, what does belonging mean to you as a Jewish woman? Has that meaning changed over time for you?
It's a wonderful question. I think about belonging in two ways. First of all, I think about belonging within the Jewish community, and I also think about belonging of the Jewish community in the society in which we live. So as a Jewish woman, in terms of within the Jewish community, I've actually my whole life worked to advance the role of Jewish women in Orthodoxy in America. I'm one of the founders of an organization called the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, which was founded in 1997. And that organization works to increase the role, inclusion, and belonging of Jewish women in Orthodox spaces. And to me, that is not just about Jewish women, but also about any group that might not feel fully a part of the Jewish community. So I'm thinking about converts, I'm thinking about Jews of color, LGBTQ Jews. Sometimes in an Orthodox community in particular, it could be Jews who are not married or who don't have children. How are we as a Jewish community working to ensure that those Jews feel like they have a voice, that they have a space, that they're not just being kind of welcomed in and tolerated, but they're being seen and they are part of the decision-making process of the community. Their values are being reflected and their needs are being met. So that's how I think about belonging inside the Jewish community. I think about it actually similarly outside the Jewish community. My work is in education spaces in America. I work with universities, higher education institutions, and schools, K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade schools, to ensure that they're places of belonging for Jews. And I think that means, in America at least, which is obviously its own context, it means understanding Jewish identity a little bit better. We're only 2% of the country, 2.5% maybe. And people don't necessarily understand Jewish identity. They don't understand how diverse we are. They don't understand that we're not all white. They don't understand that we're not all privileged. They don't understand that we're not a religion, that we're more than a religion. The Jewish people is more than a religion. And so education is such an important piece of that, understanding how to fit Jews into their understanding of what does a minority group look like in America. So it looks like that. And it also looks like advancing policies, which we do at AJC, policies that will foster inclusion and belonging, making sure that schools are including Jews, for example, in any kind of belonging programs that they have. We used to call it DEI. I don't know if you have DEI in Brazil, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right now, DEI is headed out in America. But, initiatives on belonging and inclusion, we want to make sure that Jews are included. We want to make sure that there's education and understanding of what anti-Semitism is and how it portrays, how it's showing up in this moment. We also really need schools to understand what the Jewish connection is to Israel. Because without understanding that connection, so many sort of anti-Semitic tropes can come up and end up excluding Jews from spaces in America, particularly in my case, the work that I'm doing in education spaces. So I think about belonging in those two ways, inside the Jewish community and the way the Jews are accepted outside.
Perfect. And of course, as you said, you engage with diverse Jewish communities across America and globally. So, from your perspective, what does it mean to live Judaism as a path? And not as an answer, but as a practice, as a commitment, as a conversation that evolves?
You said it very well. I think that one of the problems that we run into in our modern world is that Jewish people in America, and probably in many places around the world, don't fully understand their Jewish heritage and their Jewish background, their Jewish texts. They don't have a live connection to those things. We often say in America that Jews get an education in Judaism, and it's a very rudimentary, basic education, until they're bar bat mitzvah, and then they're out the door. And what that means is that they're engaging with Judaism as preteens for the rest of their lives. And you can't have a Judaism that is growing, that is something that is part of the world in your head that you're engaging with all the time, with a seventh grade education about it. It doesn't work that way. So one of the things I think about so deeply is how can we make Judaism into exactly what you said, into a path of growth, into a path where Jewish ideas are part of the imagination that you have when you're walking through the world, that Jewish ideas are informing you. They're setting your values. They're setting your community engagement. They're setting your philanthropy. They're setting your priorities. And I fear right now, in this modern world where people have so much choice often in how they get education, or even sometimes they don't have choice, there just isn't good Jewish education where they are, that we've robbed them. We've robbed them of the ability to have that path, exactly as you said, this path of Judaism that is an ongoing journey rather than sort of an arrested development of childhood.
I think we have a similar situation here in Brazil. So you have an experience not only in America, but globally. So as you said, the experience in America is very similar that we have here in Brazil. So people stop studying about Judaism for bar and bat mitzvah, so they don't evolve in their Judaism, so they don't have this curiosity about Judaism no longer in their life. So it's really sad, and this is something that in Academia Judaica, the organization that we are doing this podcast, we try to create this curiosity in people again. So for them to study, for them to look at this this interest in studying about Judaism and studying the texts, studying the culture, studying about our history again. So you have written and spoken about the need to hold complexity in politics, in identity, in Jewish life. How do we create spaces that allow for nuance, especially in a time growing polarization, both inside and outside the Jewish world?
This is the eternal question that I deal with all day, every day. So I'll talk about within the Jewish community first. I think that we in the Jewish community need to be much more brave than we are. When I go into schools, I talk all the time about a framework for education that I call brave and nurturing. And brave and nurturing is that students receive what they need to grow, like nurturing, like a plant. They're watered, they're fed, they get enough sunshine, meaning they get the support of the teacher, the support of the school. They're valued as a person, and that allows them to grow. But I hate when people say that a classroom should be safe. I hate that. It should be psychologically safe. It should, of course, be physically safe, but it should not be educationally safe. And bravery requires that we as a community, that our faculty, our teachers, and our students, and our communal leaders are brave enough to admit vulnerability. Are we brave enough to say, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm uncomfortable about this or that or the other idea that's being put forth, but being uncomfortable about it does not mean I'm going to shut it out. It means I'm going to engage with it. And I'm thinking particularly about the fact that our community, in America at least, and I don't know what it's like in Brazil, is very, very unable to have conversations about Israel that are in any way critical. And I think that that's a big failing, actually, of our community. I think that we're ending up alienating Zionist Jews, young Zionist Jews in particular, who are passionate about Israel, who care deeply about them. I know a lot of them. These are my former students, students of ours who are in college now, who have things to say, but they feel that they can't engage about them because it's forbidden, it's verboten in our community because we're not brave enough. And I want to argue that if we're not brave enough to have those conversations, then there's something really, really wrong. So I think that holding nuance and complexity requires that framework that I use in non-Jewish schools, but we have to apply it to the Jewish community, this brave and nurturing. We can have Jewish spaces that are nurturing. We also have to have Jewish spaces that are brave, that we're not afraid to talk about things that make us uncomfortable, that we might disagree with. Are there red lines? Sure, there are red lines. Every community is defined by red lines. Every community is defined by an idea that's unacceptable. And I don't think that it's a problem to have red lines. But I do think that it's a problem I think that right now we've created a construct where we say things behind closed doors, but we won't admit it. We won't say it out loud. We won't curate a conversation that is a conversation about Israel from a Zionist, from a love of Israel perspective. So that's what I'll say about the Jewish community. And in the outside the Jewish community, I think that it's very much the same, although there's, of course, much more diversity in many ways outside the Jewish community than within it, of course, because there isn't the bond of all of us being Jewish. So one of the things that I talk about all the time with my schools that I work with and the universities we work with is the importance of how do we curate conversations with people that we don't agree with. And if you think about the world that we're living in, the polarization that we're living in, so much of that is being fed and elevated by social media, where social media is saying to us, how do they keep us engaged? They're either bathing us in self-affirmation, right? Everything you believe is exactly right. Or they're enraging us. They're making us so angry. And there's nothing in between. There's no gray. There's no gray. So, and I realize it's very difficult for in real life spaces to combat the power of Meta, the power of social media writ large. It's not an easy thing to do. We as a community, world community, I'm not talking about Jews, I'm talking about everybody, have to figure out how to elevate, how to foster the ability amongst young people, amongst adults, amongst everyone, to sit in conversation comfortably with people with whom they disagree. And to understand that if we can't do that, we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot. We cannot progress as a society to solve the very real problems that this world is facing, huge problems, if we can't speak to people with whom we disagree. It refines our own ideas to do that, and it helps us also knit together our society in a way that we can make progress. So I think that holding that nuance is very, very challenging, and it is elevating the values and talking about the importance of those conversations to seed in our leaders the desire, the motivation to make sure that that's part of, for example, a curriculum in a school, part of what students are required to discuss and to learn about. Understand what social media is doing to them, understand what the benefits of dialogue across difference are. Those things are so important. And I want to say that I actually think the Jewish community has an enormous amount to teach the rest of the world in this moment. I always, when I go into the schools, non-Jewish schools, I always teach a piece of Talmud that talks about Hillel, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. And it talks about that we follow the house of Hillel when we make decisions about Jewish law. And the reason for that is because when Hillel was talking about his arguments, the house of Hillel, they would always include the arguments of their opponent, of Shammai. And in fact, they would put Shammai's arguments first. And because of that, we follow the arguments of Hillel. And if you think about it, Jewish culture, Jewish rabbinic culture, is a culture of debate. It's a culture of listening to people you disagree with and honing your arguments based on what the other person is saying. And it's a culture of not closing off something that you find uncomfortable or you disagree with, but bringing it in and addressing it and dealing with it and grappling with it. So I think that the Jews actually have a lot to teach the world in this moment of polarization about the benefits of dialogue, about the benefits of argument for the sake of heaven, as we call it, machloket l'shem shamayim. I hope that we'll be able to make some inroads because we're not doing well right now.
I totally agree with what you said, because I have some students that feel in the same way that you described. They are Zionists, they are proudly Zionists, but they feel that they cannot express some critics, they cannot express their opinion about some topics because they are shut down. Right now, and after October 7th, and this is my next question, I would like to know if you identify some differences before and after October 7th regarding Jewish education. But just to finish my commentary, these students of mine, they feel that after October 7th, they cannot express their opinion. Even though they are Zionists, they believe that Israel should exist as a Jewish state in Israel, in the land of Israel, they cannot express any kind of critics because they are shut down by the Jewish community. So I don't know, maybe we lost this ability of discussion. We lost this ability of hearing or the different opinions inside the Jewish community. I'm not talking about outside the Jewish community right now, but inside the Jewish community, we lost this ability of listen to different opinions and discuss and see what we can conclude from these different opinions. So once again, I would like to ask you if you identify some differences between the before and after October 7th regarding this kind of discussion in Jewish education.
Absolutely. So I'm a historian. My PhD is in American Jewish history. And historians love to categorize periods. Yeah. Like we have this period and it started on this date and it ended on that date and or that year or whatever. And we think about like what constitutes a period in history? What is a breaking point or a change that created a new period? And I always think in my head, like, what is the history book going to look like about October 7th? Will it be seen as the breaking point, as the beginning of a new era, the way it feels like it is now? I think it will. I really think it will. I think, speaking from the perspective of someone in the United States, where we are the second largest Jewish community in the world, maybe equal with Israel, maybe a little bit smaller than Israel. There are really only two big Jewish communities left in the world. I think that American Jews feel a sense of the ground shifting under their feet in ways that we haven't probably since the 1930s. There's a feeling that maybe the safety and comfort that we've had in the United States is a little shaky. Which is a terrifying thing for American Jews who are used to referring to America as the Golden Medina, the Golden Lands, where we've been safe and protected. And the historian Jonathan Sarna once said that although America has not always been heaven for the Jews, it's the furthest thing from hell that diaspora Jews have ever known. And so I sense that feeling of maybe it's not what we thought it was. So that's impacted a lot of things. In terms of Jewish education, we have a lot of data in the American Jewish community that shows that Jews have returned, we call it the surge in America, have returned to Jewish spaces, have affiliated more since October 7th. Jews on college campuses have returned to Hillel. They want Jewish engagement. They also want, I think, the comfort of their Jewish communities in a moment when being an out Jew, particularly an out Zionist, in the non-Jewish world has become more and more fraught, particularly in left-wing spaces. So the surge has changed things. The Jewish community, the organized Jewish community in the United States is like, well, this is a moment of growth. How do we hold on to it? How do we capitalize on it? How do we ensure that we keep these Jews as part of the community? How can we help give them the education that maybe they didn't have because they left at their bar and bat mitzvahs? So it is a moment of opportunity at the same time as it's a moment of enormous amount of shakiness. I think another thing that I'm seeing as a reaction of the Jewish community in this post-October 7th moment, that feeling of shakiness, I think particularly for people in my generation, I'm Gen X and maybe millennials too, certainly boomers, we grew up in a different America. We grew up in a much more a safer America for Jews. And I think that there's a feeling of enormous outrage and anxiety, particularly from people in my generation around my age who have children in school. And I think that there's a generational divide between them and their children who grew up in an America where anti-Semitism was regular and normal. And I think that has caused some issues as we think about how to advocate for ourselves in America. How do we raise the issues we want to raise? How do we change? I mean, I always think about education because that's where I work in schools. How do we change those places to be more inclusive of Jews? Sometimes we have parents and children who don't necessarily see eye to eye. A child may say, I don't see that as anti-Semitic, or it's fine, I can deal with it, it's okay, or I'm not going to report that, it's too embarrassing, or whatever. And there are pieces of their story that we like, no, get up and stand up for yourselves. And there are pieces of their story that actually we could learn from them. So I see that, and I worry in the American Jewish community that my generation is becoming strident, is becoming so angry and so anxious, so elevated, escalated in their fury in this moment in America, that we're losing, to go back to your previous question, the ability to engage with the non-Jewish community with the kind of nuance and the kind of diplomacy that we need in order to make change in a moment that's so fraught. So there are so many issues in this post-October 7th world. I haven't even spoken about Israel, which I'll get to in a second, but just in America, like, I think that we are struggling with how to maintain a surge, which is a good struggle, but we're also struggling with this shakiness, and how are we supposed to feel in this moment of shakiness? And of course, it's so difficult. I mean, for me, I know for so many, to feel that the ground is solid under our feet when there are 50 hostages still in Gaza, when soldiers are dying weekly, when Israel has been in a war on many fronts for so many months, coming up on 2 years. I always feel like, what terrible news am I going to hear when I go to sleep? What terrible news will be in the newspaper before I wake up in the morning? So I think October 7th has highlighted that the challenges that we thought were over are not. How we're going to be resilient and think about addressing those challenges in a way that will allow us to continue to thrive is the big question for Jewish leaders right now.
For us to move forward, our podcast is called Preciso Saber, that in Portuguese is I Need to Know. So we always finish our podcast asking our interviewees, what can you say for us that we need to know about your expertise, about what we discussed here today, that you think that our audience need to know?
That's a good question. I'm going to draw upon a text from Tanakh. I've thought about Queen Esther a lot since October 7th. I've thought about how she was put into a situation by chance, and that situation ends up being a situation that she learns. She finds the strength within her to capitalize on, to save her people. And I think that what I'd like to say about what people should know, need to know, is that I believe every one of us has to be an Esther right now. Every one of us has to find, even if we were previously disconnected from the Jewish community or didn't understand our Jewish identity or didn't know exactly how to talk about our Jewish identity. Right now, we all have to be an Esther because every one of us has a palace that we're in. It could be a workplace, it could be a neighborhood association, it could be a club, it could be anything, any place. Where is your palace? Where is your influence? Where can you find that passion for your people in your heart? And how can you advocate for our people in this moment? How can you do it in a way that is nuanced, that is diplomatic, and that is filled with love and strength for Am Yisrael, for the nation of Israel, for the people of Israel, for the Jewish people? And I think that every one of us has a role to play right now. It doesn't have to be marching in a protest. It doesn't have to be going to talk to a government official. But it does have to be finding the palaces that you're in and representing, defending, uplifting the Jewish people wherever you are.
And one more thing, if you have a recommendation of a book or an article, something that you would like to recommend for our audience.
Yeah, so there's a book coming out in just a few weeks. I just read it. I got a publisher's advance copy by Sarah Hurwitz. Mm-hmm. Sarah Hurwitz was the speechwriter for Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama. She just came out with a book called As a Jew. I forgot the second part. It's something about how to answer people who try to blame and shame us. It's something like that, but it's As a Jew. It's an incredible book about Jewish identity, Jewish pride, and also about anti-Semitism. How to think about it, how to understand it in this moment, and how to talk about it and combat it. It's a fantastic book. Highly recommend it.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you so much for your for everything that you taught us and everything that you provided us in this conversation. It was an honor for me, especially, and for the audience. I'm sure that they are going to love it, this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Muito obrigada por terem acompanhado até aqui essa conversa. Continuem acompanhando os episódios do nosso podcast Preciso Saber e acompanhem a Academia Judaica nas redes sociais. Estamos sempre compartilhando novos cursos e novos materiais. Até a próxima!